What's up guys, welcome to another range day. We got a fun one for you today. We're going to be doing a deep dive comparison of my FN Scar 16, Sig Sauer MCX Virtus, and CZ Bren 2 SBRs to see how they stack up against each other and see if we can declare a king of short stroke gas piston, not an AR style firearms. Guys, if you enjoy the content that I'm making, then please make sure to like and subscribe and leave me a message down in the comments section. I hate asking, but it really does help the algorithm a lot, so I would really appreciate it. And if you ring the bell icon, you should get notifications when new videos are released as well. Additionally, if you want more Chester's Hobbies content, you can follow me on Instagram where you can see what I'm working on and get previews of upcoming videos. I'm also pretty active on Reddit if you'd like to follow along with the conversations there. Alright, well that's enough of that, so back to the video of the day, let's talk about these awesome rifles. So the idea for this video actually came up when I originally posted my Bren 2 first shots video over the summer, and several people asked me how it compares to the Scar and the MCX. Since I was already planning on making individual videos for my Scar and MCX and also doing an SBR update video for my Bren 2 as well, I decided I might as well compare them all against each other while they're fresh in my mind. So by now you should have hopefully seen my individual videos on the Bren 2, Scar 16, and MCX SBRs, but in case you haven't, I'll put links to those individual videos down in the description. Now although these videos have all been released over a period of time, I actually recorded all 4 of these videos within the same week, so my thoughts would be fresh. We're going to be getting into quite a bit of detail here, specifically focusing on the shooting experience with each of these firearms. Now as an obvious disclaimer here, please keep in mind that everything I'm going to be talking about today is going to be my personal opinions based on my experiences over the course of several years of ownership for the Scar and MCX and as a new owner of the Bren 2, as well as my own personal preferences. I'll say right up front that in my opinion, all 3 of these guns are excellent and will serve you well if you're interested in any of them, but there are definitely several differences and intricacies to consider, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Make sure to let me know down in the comments what your favorite out of these awesome firearms is, and if you agree or disagree with any of my thoughts today. So we're going to dig deep on a wide variety of categories today, again focused primarily on the shooting experience. We'll be talking about recoil impulse, sight movement, triggers, manual of arms, ergonomics, unsuppressed and suppressed gas performance, suppressor host effectiveness, modularity, customizability and aftermarket, recommended upgrades and enhancements, weight and balance, some general thoughts on value, and anything else that comes to mind as we reconvene at the table later in the video. Now there are a few things that we won't be comparing today, so let's talk about that for a second. I won't be going over reliability because in my experience, all 3 of these guns have incredible reliability and they've all been extensively tested and proven by people far more experienced than me, so I don't really feel the need to rehash any of that other than to say that they all exhibit exceptional levels of reliability. We also won't be talking about accuracy today because in my experience they're all extremely accurate with excellent quality cold hammer forged barrels, and each of them has multiple barrel length options that could affect that as well, and there are also plenty of accuracy videos and discussions available as well, so that's not the direction that we're going to be going in today. Instead we'll be focusing on the recoil impulse, sight movement, and triggers, which I think would ultimately have a bigger impact on practical accuracy at the end of the day, combined with the individual pulling the trigger and their own capabilities of course. Again, the main focus today is the difference in the shooting experience of each of these firearms. One point that I do think is worth mentioning is that I would consider the playing field to be relatively even for these 3 guns here, with only one primary caveat. All 3 of these guns are registered SBRs and they've all been configured in ways that make them highly effective for me personally. For example, they all have a comfortable length of pull with their respective stocks and they all have effective vertical grips and great triggers. Now the primary caveat here is that I do have different muzzle devices on all of them, which will likely have an effect on the unsuppressed recoil and sight movement tests. I'll do my best to keep that in mind as I deliver my final remarks in these categories, but just keep in mind that my Bren 2 and MCX have very effective muzzle brakes while my Scar has a flash hider, so most likely the Scar is going to be moving around on me a little bit more under rapid fire when shooting unsuppressed. Now once I attach my dead air Sandman-S suppressor, the playing field should level out considerably. Now as I talk about the guns throughout the video, I'm going to be rolling in some footage from previous videos that I've done, but to really give these guns a fair shake and attempt to remove any perceived bias, rose-tinted glasses effects, or just to avoid making judgments based on my personal capabilities across different days, I'm going to be doing a couple of tests with all 3 guns here today to refresh my memory on what each gun feels like to shoot, which will really help me solidify my thoughts and comparisons. So the first thing that I'm going to do is some recoil, trigger, and sight movement tests. For these tests, I'm going to do 2 sets of 5 rounds rapid fire at 25 yards with each gun, 1 unsuppressed and then 1 suppressed with my dead air Sandman-S. I'll be recording simultaneously in first and third person, using a shot timer to record my split times. Then we'll slow the footage down to compare recoil and sight movement. We'll also take a look at the groups on steel to see which ones are moving around on me more. Then I'm going to do a suppressed sound test in an attempt to test the differences in sound and tone and combine that with the feel of the suppressed shooting experience to determine which of these guns are the best suppressor hosts. For those tests, I'll be doing 5 shots each, slow fire into the dirt so you don't hear any steel distracting you from the sound of the gun, again using my dead air Sandman-S suppressor. I'll also be recording simultaneously in 2 perspectives, both in first person and also about 6 to 8 feet behind me, so you can hear the difference in sound between the shooter's perspective and a nearby bystander's perspective. Lastly, I'm going to do some unsuppressed and suppressed ejection pattern tests to see how well gassed each of these guns is shooting both unsuppressed and suppressed. Once we've done all that, we'll come back to the table and discuss my thoughts on each of these guns across a bunch of different categories in great detail, and then draw some conclusions based on the test today and my overall experience and opinions on each firearm. I think this is going to be a ton of fun and hopefully you'll find it interesting and helpful as well. Alright, so let's get started guys. Let's hit the range and see how these awesome guns stack up against each other. Alright guys, these guns are all fantastic honestly. They're some of my absolute favorite guns to shoot, so it's going to be really difficult to pick a winner here. But there's definitely a lot of differences worth discussing, so let's get into it. So starting with Recoil Impulse, I would say that the Sig MCX has the lightest recoil impulse out of the three here, and I'm not considering the muzzle brake in that. I think a lot of it probably has to do with the Virtus having the lowest reciprocating mass, as it's really a very small bolt carrier group setup for the Virtus. Now second place with unsuppressed recoil impulse is going to be the CZ Bren 2. I think it's worth noting they're all incredibly soft shooting, but they do feel different from each other. The Bren 2 recoil impulse is a little bit fuller and heavier than the MCX, but it's still incredibly soft and feels like it's barely even there. Now the FN Scar 16 definitely has the most recoil out of these three, but I think that really has a lot to do with the size and weight of the bolt. It's just a lot of reciprocating mass moving back and forth. So you almost get a little bit of a double recoil impulse as the bolt goes to the rear and then goes back forward again. It's quite a bit of mass moving back and forth, but again, it is super soft shooting, extremely pleasant. And from what I understand, that double recoil impulse might be unique to the reciprocating charging handle models. I've heard people say that the new non-reciprocating charging handle setup has noticeably less recoil. I haven't had the chance to try it yet, but it's something I would be interested in checking out in the future. I don't personally mind the reciprocating charging handle, but if it was a little bit softer shooting with a non-reciprocating charging handle, I'd be very interested, of course. But again, I really can't emphasize enough that we're definitely splitting hairs here. The recoil impulse on all three of these guns is incredibly pleasant and definitely much nicer than an untuned AR-15. Now, a well-tuned AR-15 is going to be pretty close, but in my opinion, these are still just a little bit softer shooting than a well-tuned AR-15. Another thing worth noting with the Scars is the way I have it configured with the Parker Mount machine gas jets. I do think it's probably the best gassed unsuppressed, which means that the action is moving the slowest as well, so that might be contributing a little bit to the difference in the recoil impulse. Now, when shooting suppressed, it's kind of funny, they're actually completely flipped. I would say that the Scar with the suppressed gas setting using the Parker Mount machine gas jets is the softest shooting in terms of the feel of the recoil in the shoulder, but the CZ Bren 2 is extremely close. They're really close, guys. I had to split hairs to pick a winner in that category here, but with the suppressed setting on the Scar using the Parker Mount machine gas jets and the suppressed setting on the Bren 2 using the HB Industries gas regulator, they are both incredibly soft shooting. Now, the MCX Virtus, unfortunately, does not have a suppressed gas setting, so it definitely has the most felt recoil when shooting suppressed. It's very interesting again because it definitely has the least felt recoil when shooting unsuppressed, but the most when shooting suppressed, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of sight movement, this is really where the differences in the muzzle devices are going to make a really big difference here. So unfortunately, the playing field is not exactly even when we talk about the unsuppressed sight movement. So it's something to keep in mind, but the way I have these guns configured, you might be surprised, but the CZ Bren 2 MS is actually the flattest shooting with this single port dead air muzzle brake. It's really incredible how flat shooting this gun is, and it's not a ton of concussion for the shooter either. It's definitely noticeably more concussion than the Scar with just a flash hider, but I think this single port muzzle brake from dead air is a great compromise between performance and comfort. Now, coming in second place for sight movement is the Sig MCX. Probably not a big surprise here. This Lantac Dragon muzzle brake is absolutely insane, but I actually have to say it really overcompensates a little bit. The sight movement with the 11.5-inch MCX using the Lantac Dragon is essentially straight down. There's almost no left to right movement at all, but it does move straight down a few inches at 25 yards. I'd say it's easier to compensate than something like the Scar that's moving up and to the right, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So once I get used to it, I can definitely go insanely fast with this gun, but it does take a little bit more effort than with the Bren 2 because the Bren 2 is basically just right there. It just kind of stays on target, whereas this one is dipping low a little bit, so you have to remember to pull back up on target while you're shooting a little bit. Now, concussion wise, this has the most concussion by far. Outside, it's really loud. It's a lot of concussion, but once you get used to it, it's an absolute total blast to shoot. But if you're shooting this inside, you and any of your neighbors are probably not going to have a great time. Now, probably no surprise here at all, but the Scar 16 with the dead air Scar 16 flash hider has noticeably the most sight movement. Pretty standard if you shot with flash hiders before, is basically moving up and to the right, and so you need to compensate by pulling down and to the left while you're shooting. It's really not too bad, just takes considerably more effort than the other two with muzzle brakes. But when I did the dedicated Scar 16 video, I did find that after running several rounds through it, I was able to get really quick with this gun. So it definitely takes more effort to keep the sights on target, but it's really not too bad. But I will say at 25 yards, trying to shoot really rapidly, I really had to slow it down a bit with the Scar to keep all shots on target, whereas with the Bren and the MCX, I could pretty much just shoot as fast as I could pull the trigger. Now, when looking at groups on steel, keep in mind these are 12-inch by 20 20-inch targets that I was shooting at 25 yards in rapid fire, so it's pretty challenging to keep on target at that distance at the speeds I was shooting at. I think you'll notice that the SCAR had the biggest groups unsuppressed with the longest split times. That's really because of the flash hider more than anything. We'll talk about it later, but the Geisley trigger in the SCAR is actually the fastest trigger here. The muzzle device just holds it back a little bit when shooting unsuppressed. I think the groups will also show that the Bren 2 had the least amount of sight movement and was the easiest to keep on target. Well, the MCX is still very easy to keep on target, but the muzzle does move down under recoil, so that's something that you have to account for. Now, when shooting suppressed, the Bren 2 definitely had the best group under rapid fire. The double recoil impulse of the SCAR gives it a little bit more sight movement when shooting suppressed, but you also probably noticed that I had the best group when shooting the MCX Virtus suppressed. And the reason for that is actually that there was so much more recoil and sight movement with the MCX when shooting suppressed that I really had to grip down hard on it and shoot a little bit slower, which ended up resulting in a tighter group because I was working harder for it. That probably means I could have shot the MCX just a little bit faster or slowed down with the Bren and the SCAR to get tighter groups. The SCAR is also really loud unsuppressed, and they all are, honestly. Guys, short barrel 5.56 guns are just going to be loud, so something you got to keep in mind if this is a platform that you're interested in getting into. If you're going the SBR route, since you're generally not going to reach full powder burn with 5.56, you're going to end up getting a really big boom at the end of the muzzle, which in my opinion is lots of fun and very visceral feeling. But again, I'm shooting outside on a private range, so there's not really anyone that I'm bothering nearby. But if you're shooting indoors, especially in booths next to other people, it's going to be really, really loud. All right, so let's talk about triggers. Out of the box, hands down, the MCX Virtus with the Sig Matchlight Duo trigger is the best on the table out of the box. No question. It's very similar to a Geisley trigger. It's got about a 3-pound pull and a short tactile reset. It's not as clean as a Geisley trigger, but it's very, very close in my opinion. So it's a 2-stage trigger. You got a very light pull to that wall, very little creep, then you got a clean break, then a nice short reset, and you're right on that wall. Really, really nice, guys. About a 3-pound pull. It's really an excellent trigger. Now, second place for stock triggers, I'm going to give to the CZ Bren 2. It's a really light trigger pull, but the main problem is it's got a lot of over travel, which makes the reset a little bit artificially longer than it needs to be. But it's still a really light trigger and easy to run quick, so it's really not too bad out of the box. And then coming in last place for stock triggers is going to be the FN SCAR. It's kind of surprising that it's the most expensive gun on the table here, but it comes stock with essentially a mil-spec AR trigger. Certainly not bad by any means, but it's like a 5 or 6 pound pull or so, and it's really just nowhere near being a match grade trigger. Now, if we consider aftermarket trigger options, hands down, the Geisley Super SCAR trigger in the FN SCAR 16S is absolutely incredible, guys. It's very, very similar to the Geisley SSA-E trigger that I have in my Battle Arms SBR, so if you're familiar with that trigger, it's almost identical. The initial take-up feels like nothing, and then it's just an insanely clean and crisp break. With a short and tactile reset, then you're right back on that wall. It's phenomenal, guys. It is so easy to run this trigger fast. It's one of my absolute favorite triggers that I've ever used, hands down. Now, unfortunately, the SCAR can't just take any AR-15 style trigger. It needs to have a custom trigger profile, and so the Geisley Super SCAR trigger is definitely your best bet. But much like everything having to do with the SCAR, the Geisley Super SCAR trigger is very expensive, so keep that in mind. Now, much like the SCAR, the Sig MCX Virtus does have a proprietary trigger profile, and I did actually try the Geisley MCX SSA trigger, but honestly, I was a little bit disappointed with it. I'm a huge fan of Geisley triggers, but the trigger that they make for the MCX is essentially their standard SSA trigger with about a 4.5 pound pull, as opposed to their SSA-E trigger that has about a 3 pound pull. Now, comparatively, the Sig Matchlight Duo trigger that comes stock in the Sig MCX Virtus has about a 3.5 pound trigger pull, so it's not quite as clean as the Geisley trigger, but it has a lighter pull with a very similar reset. So I actually ended up getting rid of the Geisley trigger for the MCX and putting the Matchlight Duo trigger back in because I just prefer it. I think the original MCX didn't have a great trigger, and so the Geisley trigger was a huge upgrade for that. But I think for the MCX Virtus, in my opinion, the Matchlight Duo trigger is a better choice for me personally. But keep in mind, Sig is currently replacing the MCX Virtus with the MCX Spear LT, and one of the biggest upgrades for the Gen 3 MCX Spear LT is that it can take any standard AR-15 trigger. So you could put a Geisley SSA-E trigger very similar to the Super SCAR trigger in the MCX Spear, and it will run perfectly for you from what I understand. I haven't had a chance to get my hands on it just yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. Or if Geisley isn't your trigger of taste, you have a world of AR-15 style options. So technically, in terms of aftermarket availability options, the new MCX Spear is the winner, but in terms of what we have on the table, I still go with the Geisley Super SCAR trigger in the SCAR. I would say the Sig is still still second place with its Matchlight Duo trigger, even though it's stock. And then in third place is going to be the CZ Bren 2. That said, the really interesting thing about the Bren 2 is you can get just this HBI trigger shoe, not even replacing any of the other trigger components, just the shoe, and it completely gets rid of any issues that I have with the stock trigger. So this HBI trigger completely fixes the over travel issues and then effectively shortens the reset and lets the light pull weight from the factory really shine. So you got a really light take up to a nice firm wall, little bit of creep, and then a very, very light break. And then a little bit of a longer reset than the other two. But it's very tactile and not bad at all. It's very easy to run this gun extremely quick with just that shoe upgrade, which is the least expensive option out of everything that we're looking at here. All right, guys, big topic here. Let's talk about manual of arms. So starting with the charging handles, because I know people have a lot of opinions on these. In my opinion, the CZ Bren 2 has the best charging handle. I have upgraded mine with the HB Industries charging handle, but I don't think it's a necessary upgrade. It's still great from the factory. I love side chargers personally. It is really, really, really smooth, and it's non-reciprocating. So that's a big win for the Bren 2, in my opinion. Now, second place, probably a surprise, but I am going to give it to the Scar because, again, it is a side charger. It is incredibly smooth. It's like glass cycling this charging handle, guys. I do, of course, have the reciprocating charging handle model. As of the past year, they have finally released a non-reciprocating charging handle model. And the way that one works is really, really cool as well, because it does still lock back on the last round somehow, but then it doesn't reciprocate at all under fire. I haven't had the chance to shoot a Scar with a non-reciprocating charging handle yet. I could definitely see a world where it might be equal to or better than the Bren 2. But in terms of what I have here on the table, I would say the Scar with the reciprocating charging handle would probably be second place. And that's mainly because while I don't really mind AR-15 style charging handles, it's definitely not as convenient, smooth, or easy to charge as a side charger like the Bren or the Scar is. And it does open up the upper rear of the receiver for potential gas issues when shooting suppressed. Now, this MCX charging handle is ambidextrous, but the extended arms aren't extended very much, and so it's a little bit difficult to get a grab on it. The Radian Raptor charging handle is definitely better in that regard, but I tried them both side by side, and I found that the Sig MCX Virtus charging handle was a little bit better at blocking gas than the Raptor, so I stuck with this one. Now, all three of these guns have very good ambidextrous features. You see the Bren 2 here has an ambidextrous mag release here and here. It also has an ambidextrous bolt catch and release, which is the only of the three that comes with that out of the factory, unless you're considering the MCX Spear LT, which does add bolt catch and release levers on the right side, which I think is a huge improvement. I haven't had my hands on that yet, but I could very well see the MCX Spear LT being #1 in the ambidextrous category because of that addition. Now, in my experience, the stock ambidextrous bolt catch and release lever left a little bit to be desired, specifically when dropping the bolt on a fresh magazine. So I added this extended bolt catch and release lever from Lingle Industries, and it's definitely improvement, and I think it's still breaking in for me. It's not perfect yet, but it's definitely improvement on the factory version. Of course, you do have your traditional bolt open and release lever like an AR-15 style on the top. All three of them do have that. The ambidextrous safety on the CZ is actually one of my favorites. I think all the safeties are great. I don't really have a major opinion on any of them. I did find that getting the extended safety levers from HB Industries was an improvement on the CZ. I didn't feel the need to change the safety levers on the other two. Now on the Scar, again, we've got a magazine release on both sides. I did install an extended magazine release from Parker Mountain Machine on the right side. I don't think it was absolutely necessary, but I do find it to be very comfortable. Again, the safety on the Scar is very nice. I think the safety on the Scar is a little bit high for me, but it's really not too bad. It's definitely completely functional and serviceable. On the right side, it's definitely a little bit high. It's a little bit more difficult to actuate it with my trigger finger knuckle like I sometimes like to do. Now the Scar out of the box has no ambidextrous bolt catch or release lever options. However, this Parker Mountain Machine BCD is fantastic. It's better than a bad lever in my opinion, and it works beautifully to both lock the bolt open just by pushing your finger up there, and then to drop the bolt just by pulling your finger down. It works fantastically. I've had no issues with it at all. If it came like this from the factory, it would be amazing. Fortunately, this is not an extremely expensive upgrade, and it's definitely something that I would recommend if you like running your guns like that. And then lastly, here we have the MCX. Again, we have the magazine release on both sides. I like the oversized button on the right side here. The safety is excellent. It is pretty much an AR-15 style here. And so that works really nicely for me. I can get it with my trigger finger or my thumb. It's in a perfect position for me personally. And again, my MCX Virtus did not have any provision for an ambidextrous bolt catcher release, but I have another BCD from Parker Mountain Machine here, and just like the Scar, it works beautifully for me to lock the bolt back and then drop it back forward. It's fantastic. Now the Spear LT does have an ambidextrous bolt catch and release lever right here above the magazine release, which keeps your finger out of the trigger guard. I could see that being the best option here moving forward, but I haven't had the chance to get my hands on one yet. Another thing worth noting about the safeties is that both the Scar and the Bren have a 45-degree safety lever throw, which is very nice and very quick. The MCX, however, has a 90-degree safety lever throw. I'm used to 90-degree throws. I do really like 45-degree throws, but it's not an absolute must for me, just something to keep in mind. As for pistol grips from the factory and aftermarket, I would say the Sig MCX wins in my mind. I felt no need to change the pistol grip from Sig. It feels fantastic to me. It's very similar to a Magpul K2 style grip angle, but a little bit thicker, and it really fills my hand well. And then as I understand it, the MCX can take just about any AR-15 style pistol grip. I think there might be some that need a little bit of fitting, but for the most part, any AR-15 style pistol grip should work. Now the Scar, in my opinion, has the worst pistol grip out of the box because it's just a standard A2 style grip, which is just wild considering how much you pay for the gun. And it comes with the most basic pistol grip you can possibly get, which has that annoying finger groove that some people probably like, but I don't really like it. It doesn't fit my hands well. The grip profile on the Scar lower receiver is different from a standard AR-15, but you do have companies like Parker Mountain Machine that will do a custom fit for you. So I'm using a Magpul Myad grip, which I love. It works great for me, but it did have to be custom fit by Parker Mountain Machine to be able to fit in my Scar lower. They offer several different fitted pistol grip options from Magpul, BCM, etc. So it's available. It's just a little bit more difficult to get and a little bit more expensive, or you could do the fitting yourself, but that kind of sounds annoying to me. So just something to keep in mind. Now with the Bren 2, you're pretty much stuck with the pistol grip that you get from the factory, which isn't terrible. I actually do like the grip a lot. I love the texture of it. However, the factory grip was much too small for me. You do have swappable back straps, so it came with the small back strap. I put the medium back strap on. I've not been able to find a large back strap, but I will say this medium back strap feels much better to me. Adding that medium back strap and fixing the over travel on the trigger made it so it wasn't cramping my hand anymore. So I actually really like this pistol grip now, but you're very limited in terms of options with that. There are some companies out there that make aluminum lowers for the CZ Bren 2, and I think those could probably take a standard AR-15 style pistol grip, but you're talking about quite a bit more money if you're going to go that route. Now in terms of the magazine wells for reloads, I would say that the MCX Virtus has the most generously beveled and flared mag well, which makes inserting magazines extremely easy on this one. The Bren 2 does have a little bit of flaring, and the Scar kind of does a little bit in the back, but not so much in the front. But in my experience, they're all great, but I would say the MCX has the easiest magazines to insert. And then honestly, probably the Scar and the Bren are nearly identical. It's really hard to miss with the MCX. That mag well is so nice, guys. I mean, the Scar is really not bad. It's actually quite nice. It's just not quite as fast and foolproof as the MCX. Yeah, I would say probably the CZ is in second place with a slightly more beveled and flared magwell than the Scar. So in terms of ranking the magwells for reloads, I would say the MCX Virtus definitely has the best beveling and flaring out of all of them, making reloads essentially effortless with the MCX. Second place, I would probably say goes to the Bren 2, which does have some beveling and flaring, just not quite as much as the MCX. And then third place is the Scar, which doesn't give you quite as much room for error, but it's still really easy and smooth to reload in my opinion. And then something you probably heard me talk about a lot if you've seen many of my videos is QD sling points. I'd say in this regard, the Bren 2 MS does win for having the steel inserts in the QD points. You've got them in the front, and then I've got one here on this handguard. I think that is actually unique to this HB Industries handguard. I don't believe that the stock one had one. I can't remember, honestly. But I usually run single point slings on the shorties anyway, so that is great for me. And you've got one on each side, so whether you're left-handed or right-handed, you are good to go there. Second place is going to be the MCX Virtus, which does have machined-in QD sling points on the lower receiver and then also on the handguards. And you've got it on both sides, so you've got 4 here, depending on how you want to run your sling. And then my stock also has some as well. So I've got 6 QD sling points on this gun, which is just phenomenal. What keeps the MCX Virtus in second place and not first place is the fact that these are actually machined into the aluminum, which means if you're using a steel QD sling swivel, you could wear that down over time. However, it's worth noting the new MCX Spear LT does have steel inserts in the QD sling points on the lower receiver, just like the Bren 2. And so because of the volume of the QD sling points available on the MCX Spear LT, I would probably say that would win over the Bren, in my opinion. Now, the SCAR didn't come with any QD sling points at all. I had to add them. I've got these Kinetic Development Group QD sling points at the front and at the rear. They work great for me, but I did have to add them after the fact. And there are a few different companies that make those. You got Parker Mountain Machine, Kinetic Development Group, and some others as well. All right, so now getting into ergonomics, when it comes to stock and brace options, I think the clear winner is going to be the MCX Virtus, because Sig's 1913 Picatinny rail lower receivers give you so many options to choose from when you're looking at different brace and stock options. I think people might make 1913 adapters for the SCAR and the Bren as well. I'm not positive, but in my opinion, they don't really look quite right on those platforms where the MCX was really designed around it, and so I think it works great. I know some people love and some people hate the Sig folding mechanism. I've gotten used to it. It works perfectly for me. You can switch it to fold to the left or the right. For me, it works beautifully. I really like it. I do think that the new Spear LT, which has a push button, is probably going to be something that people like a lot better. But for me, the opposing pressure method seems to work just fine, keeping in mind that sometimes the stocks need to be folded and unfolded a few times before they really smooth out. There are a ton of stock and brace options from Sig and countless third-party manufacturers, and I think support in the future is only going to go up, so that's a great system. Now, the Bren 2 comes from the factory with an AR-style buffer tube, so that does give you an enormous amount of options for both stocks and braces. And then there are a few different options like the OEM folding stock here that I have and love. You can also put something like an ACR stock on here with an adapter as well. The AR buffer tube is fine, but it doesn't really give you any folding functionality. This one has 3 positions of adjustability and it folds very nicely. It retains on the brass deflector and it's a nice tight package, and then it can deploy very easily, so I love this stock. For brace options, you'd really either have to stick with the AR buffer tube or get an ACR stock with a tail hook adapter, and that's getting pretty expensive at that point. For the SCAR, it comes with a classic Ugg boot style stock, which I personally really like. It has a cheek riser that's very functional, adjustable length of pull, and it folds and retains off to the side, clicking into the brass deflector. And it does unfold well, but in my experience, I wouldn't slam this one closed because it's all plastic parts and I get quite a bit of resistance there, so I do tend to press the button when I'm closing the SCAR Ugg boot stock. I think this setup works really well, and I think a lot of the problem that people have with it is that it literally just looks like they stuck an Ugg boot on the end of the gun. But functionally, I think this works great for me. A lot of people put an ACR stock on here and believe that it's a functional improvement. I haven't tried it personally, but for me, the Ugg boot stock works well. I'm not really sure that there are a lot of SCAR braced pistols out there, but you would have to do something like a tail hook adapter on an ACR stock, to my understanding. In terms of how compact they can get, the Bren 2 definitely has an advantage right now because I have the 8-inch model here, whereas I have the 11.5-inch model of the MCX, and I have a 10-inch SCAR 16. But you can see here they can all get pretty compact when folded. I would say that the SCAR is the chunkiest. It is the widest, I think, of all of them, but maybe not. Maybe not, but I think they're all pretty compact when folded. I think they all would stow away very well. Keeping in mind that the shortest you can get an MCX Virtus or a Spear LT is going to be the 11.5-inch model. And then I think the shortest that you're going to get a SCAR is going to be the 10-inch model that you see here. But the CZ Bren 2 does have a few more barrel length options. In terms of handguard options, they're all a little bit quirky. I think Sig technically wins with the MCX Virtus because they have several different lengths of their standard handguard style. And they also have several lengths of suppressor style handguards that are extra wide that would allow you to countersink a suppressor underneath. So there's a lot of options directly from Sig there. Then you have other companies like Midwest Industries and possibly Lancer that are making handguards for it as well. So I think it probably has the most aftermarket and OEM support in terms of handguards. Now for me personally, I know a lot of people think that these handguards are really heavy and a little too wide. I actually find them to be really ergonomic. I can get a nice thumb overbore grip, and with this BCM vertical grip, this MCX really feels excellent to me. I love that grip. It's really thin with the standard handguard. I like the wide suppressor handguards as well, but these ones feel great to me. Now the SCAR probably comes in second when it comes to handguard options, mostly because of Parker Mountain Machine. There might be some other companies out there, but Parker Mountain Machine is really well known for having a lot of SCAR products. From the factory, the quad rail, in my opinion, is fully functional. I really like the look. I like the feel, but it is really short from the factory in my opinion. So getting this extended rail from Parker Mountain Machine makes a big difference, especially because on the reciprocating charging handle model, you really don't want to get your hand too close to that charging handle, or you're going to have a malfunction and a pretty bad day for your thumb as well. So being able to put the vertical foregrip more forward on the gun and having that extra rail space really feels great to me. It's definitely pretty girthy with the quad rails, but to me, it feels great. It's really comfortable. I'm a big fan of the look and feel. But what a lot of people do is they slim this down by using the Parker Mountain Machine Rail Delete Kit, which completely gets rid of the side quad rails and makes it much, much thinner. Or they get the Parker Mountain Machine M-lok kit, which allows you to have M-lok rails on the sides instead of Picatinny rails. So in both of those cases, you're saving both size and weight and getting a much thinner handguard, probably a little bit closer to the MCX Virtus. So really good aftermarket support for the Scar, specifically from Parker Mountain Machine, possibly others, but definitely from Parker Mountain Machine. Really nothing from FN. They just give you these handguards and that's what you get. Now the CZ Bren 2 is interesting because there's different handguards depending on which barrel length you get. For the 8-inch and 11-inch handguards, it's a really short handguard that I think looks really cool, but functionally it's only got one M-lok slot and it just doesn't give you a lot of options for angled or vertical foregrips. This HB Industries handguard is excellent. It's very lightweight, extremely ergonomic. It feels great in the hands. I'm a big fan of this handguard specifically. I think there might be a couple of other manufacturers that make handguards, but HB Industries is really the biggest name in the game when it comes to things like the CZ Bren 2 or the CZ Scorpion. So that's the first place I'd really look for any of these upgrades. So I'd say the Bren 2 has the least support and options when it comes to aftermarket, but depending on the barrel length that you get, some of the longer ones like the 14-inch and 16-inch CZ Bren 2 come with some actually pretty good handguards out of the box. So that's something to keep in mind. The Bren 2 is very much going to be dependent on which barrel length that you get in terms of how effective the handguard is. Now we're going to get real subjective here for a second in terms of the overall feel and which of these guns are the most comfortable to pick up and shoulder and fire on target rapidly. Let's see, I hadn't thought about this one too much. So I would say the Scar is the least ergonomic in terms of it does have this very fat quad rail handguard in this setup, which I do personally like, but it's probably the least ergonomic. I think that handguard wise, believe it or not, I really like the MCX. It's got AR style ergonomics. It feels very slim in the hand, this handguard, and I've got it set up with my favorite BCM vertical grip. So I think that the way I have them set up right now, I would say that the MCX probably feels the best in terms of the support hand grip, but in terms of the overall weight and balance and feel, probably the Bren 2, I would say, is going to be my favorite here. All right, now this is going to be a big one for a lot of people here in terms of weight. As configured here, the Bren 2 is a very impressive 7 pounds, 0.6 ounces. It is just barely over 7 pounds, guys. This gun is so light and handy. Now keep in mind, this is the 8-inch barrel model, but this is the second generation of the CZ Bren, and they really focused on cutting down the weight wherever they could. And as a result, it is a much lighter and handier weapon than it was before. Now the Sig MCX Virtus is a lot heavier by comparison. In this configuration, it is 8 pounds, 11.9 ounces. But keep in mind, this Juliet 4x magnifier does weigh 12.5 ounces. So I can take that off, and it's basically about a pound heavier than the Bren 2 in this 11.5-inch configuration. Now, it's worth noting in the Gen 3 MCX Spear LT, they also sent their gun to Fat Camp, and as a result, reportedly lost almost a pound in weight. I haven't had the chance to get my hands on one yet. I know the 11.5-inch models are going to be really difficult to get for a while, but presumably the MCX Spear LT could be very similar in weight to the Bren 2 MS, and that's really exciting. Now, the Scar 16 is a chunky boy. So this one is 9 pounds, 3.9 ounces, as you see it configured here, keeping in mind that you've got about 10.6 ounces in the EOTech G33 magnifier here. So if you take that off, you'd be looking at around 8.5 pounds for the Scar 16. So it's definitely without a doubt the heaviest of the three options here. But lighter weight doesn't necessarily translate to better balance. So let's talk about that for a second. I think without a doubt, the Bren 2 MS does have the best balance it really doesn't feel front heavy at all. It feels very centrally weighted, maybe a little bit front heavy, but overall it's extremely light and handy, and it really just feels like nothing in your hands when compared to its heavier friends here. Now you may be a little bit surprised by this, but in my opinion, the SCAR 16 has a better balance than the MCX Virtus. It's a little bit more center weighted, and even though it's about a half a pound heavier than the MCX Virtus, for me it balances just a little bit better, and it's not quite as front heavy, and so it's a little bit easier to transition from target to target for me with the SCAR 16. I think some of that is probably because of the really lightweight stock that I have here on the MCX Virtus. This thing weighs almost nothing. It's really nice and adjustable. It folds really nicely. I find it to be very comfortable. However, the handguard and barrel are a lot heavier in comparison, and as a result, the MCX Virtus is a lot more front heavy than the other two options. It is not bad. It still points very well for me, and I definitely love shooting this gun. But even though it is technically a half a pound lighter than the SCAR, it feels heavier to me than the SCAR because of the more front biased weight. All right, so let's talk about the gas performance with these guns. I'm gonna roll in some footage showing each of these guns shooting both unsuppressed and suppressed, and we're gonna look at the ejection pattern to see where on a clock face these guns are ejecting. One thing that's really interesting about the 5.56 platform in either an AR-15 or a short stroke piston style gun is you can tell a lot about how well the gun is tuned based on the ejection pattern. Ideally, you wanna have somewhere between a 330 to a 430 ejection pattern. 4 o'clock is probably gonna be considered the Goldilocks type scenario, and what that essentially means is that you've got just enough gas with the ammo that you're using to get a nice clean ejection that's not too aggressive, which means that you're going to have better parts longevity because the gun's not beating itself up as much, and you're also going to have a comparatively softer recoil impulse as well, so it's just going to be more pleasant to shoot overall. Now, it wasn't super hot today, but it was very humid, so keep that in mind. That might have colored the performance of these guns a little bit, but actually with the Parker Mount machine gas jets, the SCAR 16 had the best unsuppressed performance in terms of the ejection pattern, which was right around 4 o'clock to 4:30 as far as I could tell. And I'll make corrections to these, of course, in the video if I didn't see it quite right while I was on the range. Now, the MCX Virtus was still very, very good, around 330 or so unsuppressed. And then the CZ Bren 2 was around 330 unsuppressed as well. So really all of these guns unsuppressed, very, very good gas performance with the Wolf Gold brass case 5.56 ammunition that I prefer to use. Now where things get really interesting is when shooting these guns suppressed. So the Bren 2 with the suppressed HB Industries gas regulator setting was ejecting right around 3 o'clock suppressed. Now keep in mind HB Industries did also provide a heavier piston spring, which would probably get me closer to 4 o'clock. But because I was already right on the edge of reliable performance unsuppressed, I decided to stick with the stock piston spring. Now the SCAR had very good suppressed gas performance, ejecting right around 330 or so. Those Parker Mount machine gas jets combined with the factory suppressed setting on the SCAR make a huge, huge difference. Now coming in last place by quite a bit is the MCX Virtus when shooting suppressed, ejecting around 1:30 to 2 o'clock, which really makes a lot of sense because there's no suppressed setting on the MCX Virtus, unfortunately. You have a 2-position gas block on the MCX Virtus, which allows you to go with less gas or more gas, but more gas is made for adverse settings and less gas is made for everything else. So while the MCX Virtus runs fantastically unsuppressed, when shooting it suppressed, it runs very well, but it's got a lot more gas than the other two options on the table that have adjustable gas blocks that account for being suppressed. I really, really wish that SIG would add a suppressed gas setting. I'm sure there's a few reasons that they don't do it, but I think it would really put the MCX over the top if there was a dedicated suppressor setting on the gas block. That said, in terms of gas in the face, it really is not bad for me personally. I think the MCX Virtus charging handle does a good job of blocking gas from coming out of the charging handle port, and I really didn't notice too much gas at all when shooting the Virtus suppressed, even though it is definitely a little bit on the overgas side. I smelled the gas a little bit, but really not too bad. Now the Bren 2 MS with the adjustable gas block service from HB Industries is just super, super smooth suppressed, and I didn't notice any gas at all. This stock does a great job of covering up any gas that could be otherwise escaping. It is extremely pleasant to shoot the Bren 2 suppressed with that HB Industries gas setting. Now keep in mind, while I did get the service on mine, HB Industries now actually offers an entire gas regulator if you want to just buy it from them directly and not modify your factory one. I think both are great options and 100% worth it. It's not a super expensive service, and if you want to shoot the Bren 2 suppressed, it makes a massive difference, guys. In my experience, out of all three of these guns, I definitely found the CZ Bren 2 MS to be the flattest and most pleasant gun to shoot suppressed. That said, guys, the SCAR 16 is really close. It is a phenomenal suppressor host, which really blows my mind because FN actually says in the manual and then doubles down if you ask them about it, that shooting this gun suppressed will void the factory warranty, which is just crazy in my opinion because they're the only one that out of the box actually includes a suppressor setting on the gun, and it really feels like it was meant to run suppressed. It runs beautifully for me. It seemed to be the best gassed and the softest shooting with a little bit more muzzle movement, probably because of the reciprocating charging handle setup that I have, but just an extremely pleasant shooter suppressed. Now, there is one caveat I'll mention with the UGG boot stock. If you have the cheek riser up, gas will start to escape from here and it becomes one of the gassiest 5.56 guns I've ever shot. If you have the cheek riser up, it's kind of crazy. But if you have the cheek riser down, all I ever did was really notice the smell, but never got bad to the point where it was stinging my eyes or anything. Just something to keep in mind. I noticed the gas more on the SCAR than on the other guns here, but if I kept the cheek riser down, it was perfectly manageable and didn't bother me at all, even under rapid fire. So in terms of suppressor host effectiveness, I would say for me, the winner is going to be the CZ Bren 2 with the HB Industries suppressed gas regulator setting, because it's just extremely soft and flat shooting, very lightweight, no gas at all. It's just incredibly pleasant to shoot the CZ Bren 2 suppressed, guys. And if you're going to be shooting it suppressed all the time, you could add in the HB Industries heavy piston spring, and in theory, it should be even softer and flatter shooting for you. And then a really close second is going to be the SCAR 16, which is just incredibly soft shooting and pleasant suppressed. There is a little bit more gas coming out of the UGG boot stock than there is with the CZ OEM stock and the Bren 2, but that factory suppressed setting from FN works beautifully, and it's just so strange that they don't support shooting it suppressed. I know I'll get off that one, guys, but it's just really, really strange to me. Then you have companies like Parker Mountain Machine that give you a wide variety of gas jets that are really inexpensive to help you tune the performance of the gun, both unsuppressed and suppressed, and the SCAR is definitely a winner when shooting it suppressed, guys. It is so smooth and tons of fun. And of course, last place for suppressor host performance is the MCX Virtus. It is still an excellent host, guys. It is much cleaner than a standard direct impingement AR-15 would be. As all of these guns are, they're actually incredibly clean when shooting suppressed, which is really kind of mind-blowing. I don't clean my guns super often, but I've gotten in the habit of cleaning them after my range day videos just to see how they're doing. And all three of these guns really blew my mind at how clean they were after shooting 200 or 300 rounds, about half of which was suppressed. So the MCX Virtus, in my opinion, still a very good suppressor host, but combine the fact that there's no option for a suppressor setting on the gas block, the extra felt recoil that you get when shooting suppressed, and the fact that it's already the most front heavy out of all three of these. And I would say that the MCX Virtus is the worst suppressor host on the table, although still an excellent host in its own right. And then again, if you look at the MCX Spear LT with a much lighter forend, that gets rid of the balance issue, and then you've got a much better suppressor host potentially with the Spear LT. Now, in terms of modularity and aftermarket options, the easiest winner of the day is going to be the MCX Virtus. I demonstrated in my previous video just how quickly you can change the barrel, caliber, and handguard in the MCX Virtus. It took me about 3.5 minutes to convert this 11.5-inch 5.56 gun into a 6.75-inch 300 blackout gun with a countersunk suppressor. It's simply phenomenal, guys, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that while it did take them a long time to do it, SIG supports the Virtus quite well when it comes to barrel options. For 5.56 barrel options, you've got 11.5 inches and 16 inches, and then for 300 blackout options, you have 9 inches and 6.75 inches. So that's one gun that can have 4 different barrel lengths across 2 calibers, and you can switch between each of them in less than 5 minutes. It's a really, really impressive setup. Now, the Bren 2 seems to be about where the original MCX was, where supposedly you can change out the barrels on the Bren 2, and there are a lot of barrels available in terms of ones that you can get from the factory, but CZ really so far is not supporting the barrel change functionality of this gun, and so at the moment it's just really not a thing unless you swap barrels with a friend or something. And from what I understand, changing calibers is possible, but there are so many parts that you have to change that it really kind of makes it not super viable. Compare that to the Virtus, where all you have to change is the barrel, and then the caliber conversion from 5.56 to 300 blackout just works with the exact same bolt configuration and everything. It's really phenomenal, honestly, and their 300 blackout barrels are gassed beautifully as well. Now, in terms of barrels, the SCAR really doesn't have a ton of options. I did swap out the 16-inch barrel for the factory 10-inch barrel, and it wasn't too bad, but definitely nowhere near as quick and easy as the MCX. There are no caliber exchange kits available, and I could be wrong, but I think you can really only get the 16-inch or maybe the 18-inch version of the Scar. If you want to have a 10 or a 14-inch version, you've got to buy the barrels separately, and that's a huge expense. So in terms of aftermarket barrel options you can get for the Scar, it typically comes with a 16-inch barrel, and then you can get an 18-inch barrel, a 14-inch barrel, or a 10-inch barrel, all in 5.56, and all of them come with a gas block setup as well. For the Bren 2, while you can't currently buy any of the barrels separately, you can from the factory get the Bren 2 in 16, 14, 11.5 inch, or 8 inches in 5.56, and you can also get it in 16, 14, 11, and 9 inches in 7.62 by 39. But more than likely, you're probably not going to be swapping calibers on the same firearm. If you really wanted a Bren 2 in 2 different calibers, you'd most likely be better off getting 2 of them. And then again, the MCX Virtus can come in 16 or 11.5 inches for 5.56, and then 9 or 16 or 6 3/4 inches for 300 blackout. Now the MCX Spear LT also comes in 7.62 by 39. I'm under the impression that the Spear LT can still do barrel swaps and caliber conversions, but I think it's going to take a little bit more time and be slightly more complicated because of the new handguard setup. Now aside from barrel options, in terms of aftermarket for the MCX Virtus, there is some. Again, there's a few different people that make different handguards for the MCX, and Sig supports the MCX very well in terms of handguard selection. You got a lot of stock and brace options, and you can take a lot of AR-15 style accessories like pistol grips and I believe safeties, but don't quote me on that. Although there is a proprietary trigger in the Virtus, the Spear LT can take any AR-15 style trigger, which is a huge win for the modularity and versatility of the Sig MCX Spear LT. Now the Scar has been out there for a while with a lot of different aftermarket support from a wide variety of third-party manufacturers. FN really doesn't give you a lot of customizable options from the factory, but companies like Parker Mountain Machine and others do have a lot of cool products available for the Scar to customize the look, feel, and functionality to your tastes. There are even other adjustable gas block options out there like the Scarburator that can in theory make the Scar an even better suppressor host, so that's really interesting as well. Now the CZ Bren 2 is the newest kid on the block, and HB Industries has really dove in head first with a lot of aftermarket support for it. So honestly, there are quite a few options for the CZ Bren 2, but not quite as much as the Scar or the MCX Virtus just yet. In terms of things that I've done to these guns so far, for the MCX, really all I've added is the Parker Mountain Machine battery control device. Everything else on the lower receiver is pure stock. And then I added the Sig folding stock and the Lantac Dragon Chemo muzzle brake. And then of course I added my favorite BCM vertical grip to it as well. For the Scar, I've done quite a few things here. I've got the Dead Air Chemo Scar flash hider, Parker Mountain Machine rail extension and gas jets in the gas block, a Troy vertical grip, a GG&G extended charging handle, Kinetic Development QD sling points, the Parker Mountain Machine BCD, Parker Mountain Machine oversized magazine release, the Geisley Super Scar trigger, and the Magpul Myad pistol grip fitted by Parker Mountain Machine. And then again, I just stuck with the standard UGG boot stock. Now for the Bren 2, I added the Dead Air single port key micro muzzle brake, the HB Industries gas regulator, HB Industries handguard, which to me is a big upgrade over the standard handguard, the Troy vertical grip, HB Industries extended charging handle, the Lingle Industries extended bolt catch and release lever, the HB Industries Bren 2 trigger shoe, HB Industries extended safety levers, CZ Bren 2 medium pistol grip backstrap, and then the CZ OEM waffle style folding stock. Now for sight setups on these, I love all of them. I will say that the Holosun AEMS or Ames Red Dot is the newest one that I've started using, and I'm really loving it. I love the big window and the very clear reticle. The EOTech also has a very big window, but with my astigmatism, the holographic reticle can be a little bit blocky and not as precise, but I do love the G33 flip to side magnifier. It works great and it's very, very clear. There's a 3x magnifier and I think it works perfectly on this setup. And it's a little bit lighter than the Sig 4x magnifier as well. Now the Sig Romeo 4T red dot is excellent. It has both circle dot and red dot options, just like the Holosun AEMS does. But it's a standard tubular style, which is what I use on most of my guns. I have been noticing that having a bigger window like the EOTech or the AEMS does give you a little bit more room for error when it comes to head placement. This Juliet 4x magnifier is really nice. It works exactly like the EOTech G33 in terms of being able to flip it to the side and flip it back very quickly and easily. And they both have really nice QD mounts to remove them quickly and easily as well if you want to, which is nice because these are 12.5 and 10.6 ounces respectively. So removing them, if you don't think you need them, does save you quite a bit of weight. I will say I think the glass is a little bit clearer on the EOTech, but the Juliet 4 is still very, very good. Now, the other big question is, if you're going to pick one of these up, what are the biggest recommendations I can make in terms of increasing the performance and functionality of these firearms? When it comes to the MCX, almost nothing, honestly. On the Virtus, the only thing I would add is this Parker Mountain Machine BCD, which for me is a huge manual of arms improvement, being able to lock the bolt open and drop the bolt on a fresh mag when inserted. I absolutely love this functionality. And in the Gen 3 Sig MCX Spear LT, they've actually built this into the lower receiver, and so you don't even need to add anything to have a fully functioning, awesome firearm, in my opinion. I think the Sig MCX is the most turnkey solution to basically just pick up and go with minimal upgrades needed. Obviously, if you want to suppress any of these guns, all of them will need a muzzle device installed to work with your suppressor of choice. Unless, of course, you get the new Spear LT and happen to have a Sig suppressor that will install on it, then of course you don't need to. But in most cases, you're probably going to need to swap the muzzle device. Now with the SCAR 16, I think the Parker Mountain BCD is a huge upgrade in terms of adding the ambidextrous bolt control that we've talked about a few times now. I think changing out the pistol grip is a must in my opinion, unless you just happen to love A2 style pistol grips. And otherwise, I think just customizing the handguard however you like. If you like the quad rails, that's fine. For me, being able to have my hand further out on the handguard got me away from the charging handle, which really prevented that being an issue with the reciprocating charging handle model. Now, if you're getting a new one that has a non-reciprocating charging handle, you're not going to have to worry about that, and then maybe the handguard's just going to be fine for you. But there are also some really cool options if you want to have M-lok handguards, or if you want to just remove the rails from the side entirely, just slim it up a bit. If you're getting the reciprocating charging handle model, I would definitely recommend something like this GG&G enhanced charging handle. It keeps your knuckles away from your optics, and it's a huge improvement. But I think FN figured that out because the new non-reciprocating charging handle model, I believe, has something very similar to this. Now, on the Bren 2, a lot of it is going to have to do with just your personal preference. I think the biggest upgrade for the Bren 2 that costs the least amount of money is just replacing that trigger shoe with the HP Industries trigger shoe. It makes a huge difference on the trigger pull, guys. I can't emphasize that enough. For me personally, the medium backstrap costs like $8 and really improved the feel of the pistol grip for me personally. I think the extended safety levers are very nice, but not absolutely necessary. I don't think the extended charging handle is necessary at all. However, it is nice. If you're going to SBR this gun, specifically the 8-inch, then I think swapping out the handguard with the HP Industries one, or getting the Preston Precision or P2 Tactical under rail makes a huge difference and is definitely worth considering as well. I think the extended bolt catch and release lever from Lingle Industries is really nice in theory. However, I think mine still needs to break in a little bit before I really give it the thumbs up. All right, guys, so when it comes to value on these guns, I think value is really subjective, but let's talk about it a little bit. The SCAR is without a doubt the hardest one to recommend because it's the most expensive rifle on the table. And personally, after all these upgrades, it's easily the most expensive rifle that I own. But I will say I do absolutely love it. You just have to keep in mind that not only the rifle itself, but every upgrade for the SCAR, whether it's FN specific or third-party related, is going to be very expensive as well. Everything that has to do with the SCAR is going to be expensive. So if it's what you really want, then go for it. But just know that you're probably going to have to pay quite a bit to get it set up the way you want. Now, in stark contrast to that, the Bren 2 MS is easily the least expensive by quite a bit on the table here. And while there are definitely a few upgrades I would highly recommend, most of the upgrades for the Bren 2 are really affordable in comparison to anything for the SCAR. So I think the best value on the table is probably the CZ Bren 2 MS. However, it does still have a proprietary trigger, which I think is very good after the HP Industries trigger shoe, but you're going to have less upgrade opportunities for the trigger and the pistol grip unless you're going to get a really expensive lower receiver. And then that kind of kills the value proposition, in my opinion, a little bit. Now, the MCX Virtus, or more specifically the MCX Spear LT that's going to be replacing the Virtus now, is right in the middle of the two in terms of price, but in terms of raw value for your dollar, it has the least amount of things that I would change about it. I actually think that if I was to get a Spear LT right now, the only thing I would change would be the muzzle device so it would work with my dead air suppressors. Other than that, I think the MCX is a fantastic platform that really needs very little, if anything, to run great. All right, before we get to my final recommendations, I'm going to talk about something completely subjective and just have a little bit of fun here. We're going to talk about cool factor. Now, cool factor is fun to talk about in a light-handed manner, but in my opinion, the aesthetics of a gun do actually matter more than a lot of people give it credit for. Basically, in my opinion, if you love the way the gun looks, if you think it looks really cool, you're going to be more likely to want to pick it up, dry fire it, bring it to the range, and practice with it. And at the end of the day, that's what matters more than anything. By contrast, if you think the gun looks kind of ugly, you're probably not going to reach for it in the safe quite as much as you might something that you really like. So just something to keep in mind. But when it comes to pure cool factor, for me, no surprise here, the FN SCAR 16 has my heart. I've seen this gun in so many movies and used it in so many video games. It's one of my holy grail guns and I absolutely love it. It's easily one of the coolest guns I own. I absolutely love this thing. 50 shades of FDE and all. In second place for cool factor, it's kind of tough, but I actually think I'm going to pick the Bren 2, specifically because of how light and compact this gun is. It's also pretty new to me compared to the other two, so keep that in mind. There might be a little bit of a honeymoon phase going on here, but I think this gun is just so light, handy, and cool looking, really functional, and really awesome to shoot. Third place for cool factor is going to be the MCX, and that's really just because it kind of just looks like an AR. In my opinion, it is way cooler than a standard AR-15, so don't get me wrong, but aesthetically, it's just so AR-like and so purely good, honestly, but it makes it just a little bit vanilla because maybe it's a little bit less quirky than the other two. All right, guys, we're at the tail end here. Let's talk about recommendations. So if your primary purpose is to have a 5.56 suppressor host, I'm going to recommend the CZ Bren 2 MS with the HB Industries gas regulator. It is super soft and flat shooting, light and handy, and super comfortable and fun to shoot. I absolutely love this gun as a suppressor host. It's honestly one of my favorites when it comes to a 5.56 gun. Now the SCAR 16 is really close when it comes to a good suppressor host, but FN claims that it will void your warranty if you suppress the gun. Then they double down on it if you ask them about it. So I think that combined with the extra weight of the SCAR 16 versus the CZ Bren 2 that weighs about 1.5 pounds less makes the Bren 2 the best suppressor host on the table in my opinion. Now for modularity and versatility, hands down the Sig MCX wins in spades. Guys, it is so easy and quick to swap out barrels, handguards, and calibers with this gun. It is phenomenal. And honestly, it kind of blows my mind when I swap out calibers with the MCX Virtus from 300 Blackout to 5.56. I really don't even need to adjust my red dot. It is that close. I would say it's definitely within 2 MOA, which at the ranges that I'm shooting personally is totally fine. Now, if you're going to be using it for serious use, I would definitely re-zero every time you switch, but it's really, really close. In comparison, the Bren 2 MS should be able to swap barrels eventually, but caliber swaps are going to be a lot more difficult and costly. There are no caliber swaps available for the SCAR 16, and the barrel swaps are considerably more complicated as well. So easily, modularity and versatility goes to the MCX. The only caveat there is that if versatility to you doesn't mean caliber and barrel swaps, but more means being able to shoot both unsuppressed and suppressed and have both run extremely well, then I would probably steer you a little bit more towards either the SCAR or the Bren, keeping in mind that the Bren does have to have an aftermarket gas regulator installed in order to really see that performance increase. But both the Bren and the SCAR run beautifully, both suppressed and unsuppressed with the gas adjustments that are available to them, whereas the MCX is going to be a little bit less pleasant to shoot suppressed, still totally functional and manageable. And if you're using something like an OSS suppressor, it probably wouldn't even be a problem at all. But if you're using a more traditional style suppressor, then the MCX is probably not going to be the most versatile if versatility to you means being able to have the best of both worlds with both unsuppressed and suppressed gas performance. Now, in terms of a turnkey solution that's going to be the best out of the box with no upgrades needed at all, I would say easily, hands down, that goes to the Sig MCX, even the Virtus, but definitely the Spear LT. I probably wouldn't change anything on the Spear LT outside of adding like a vertical grip and changing the muzzle device. But in my opinion, the Sig MCX is pretty much good to go with no changes out of the box. It's just simply a phenomenal gun. By contrast, the SCAR and the Bren 2 have a few things that I really felt like I needed to change to get the best performance out of them. In terms of the SCAR, some of those changes are fairly expensive, especially the Geisley Super SCAR trigger, for example. But most of the changes I recommend for the Bren 2 MS are really not too bad in terms of costs and make a huge difference in the overall performance of the gun, in my opinion. In terms of the best value or best performance for your dollar, this is really, really tough, guys, but I actually think I would say the CZ Bren 2 MS has the best performance for the dollar. With a couple of relatively inexpensive upgrades, this gun works beautifully both suppressed and unsuppressed and would come in less expensive than the SCAR by a mile and a little bit less expensive than the MCX, with overall better performance if you're looking for both suppressed and unsuppressed performance in one single caliber. Now, if you want to be able to swap barrel lengths and calibers easily, you're going to get a lot more of that with the MCX, but keep in mind that the caliber exchange kits from Sig are fairly expensive, and so there's quite a bit of an investment involved if you want to reach that level of modularity with the MCX. Now, in terms of overall best performer, again, guys, all of these guns are phenomenal. They're some of my favorite guns to shoot. None of these guns are even remotely close to bad. They're all completely fantastic. But in terms of the best overall performer, in terms of both suppressed and unsuppressed, in my opinion, it's the CZ Bren 2 with the HB Industries gas regulator. That HB Industries trigger shoe gives this gun a really awesome trigger. In this 8-inch setup, it's extremely light and handy, super fun to run, and it's gassed beautifully both unsuppressed and suppressed with the HB Industries gas regulator. So in my opinion, I think the best overall performer is probably the CZ Bren 2 MS. But in terms of bomb-proof reliability, I do think that the SCAR 16 and the MCX do have more service life under their belts. So keep that in mind. The Bren 2 is a little bit of a newer player in the game, but the early results with the Bren 2 have been extremely impressive for sure. So of these three, with all things considered, I think the best gun overall is probably the MCX, specifically the Spear LT, because it can take AR-15 triggers. It's about 1 pound lighter than the Virtus, has a fully ambidextrous little receiver, and then the caliber and barrel swaps that make the MCX platform so awesome. But then the Bren 2 is also a fantastic performer with just a little bit less versatility and a couple of upgrades that I would definitely recommend doing from the factory. If your primary goal is suppression, then the MCX is a little bit less enticing in my opinion, but both the CZ Bren 2 do, and the SCAR work beautifully in that regard. And then lastly, guys, when it comes to short stroke gas piston 5.56 guns, if you want one of the most original and iconic guns that's one of the most recognizable even to people that aren't into guns, and you can stomach the high price of admission, then the FN SCAR 16 is easily one of the coolest guns that you can get, and one of the coolest guns that I own in my personal opinion. So there it is, guys, my SCAR versus MCX versus Bren comparison. Again, these are my opinions. You may have different ones, and I'd love to hear about them down in the comment section. Do you have experience with any of these guns or all these guns? What do you think? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Let me know. For anyone interested in any of these guns, I really hope that you found this information helpful and entertaining. But that's gonna be all for today, guys. We got a lot more videos coming up soon, including more ARs, AKs, PCCs, handguns, and shotguns. So remember to like and subscribe, ring the bell, stay tuned, and thanks for stopping by.